The left really hates cancel culture, don't they? Now, of course, I'm not referring to the act of cancel culture. Of course, I know that that particular tactic has been much too useful to the left over the past 100 years for them to even think of discarding it. No, rather, I am referring to the term cancel culture, and the reason that they don't like that term in particular should be fairly obvious, and that is, it's a really effective attack from the right. And really, understand this, that isn't very common. The right has been making very ineffectual attacks on the left culturally for centuries, and this is the first one that seems to be doing any sort of damage to their agenda. And so they have been making constant, continuous, and frankly contradictory arguments against this over the past year and change, ever since the term has really existed at all. Whether it be their original argument, which is, of course, cancel culture is just consequence culture. If you're getting canceled, then, well, people just don't like you. Or whether it be their most recent argument, the right is the true cancel culturalists. If you're not funding my indoctrination program for preschoolers, then you're violating my free speech rights, which is being pushed most prominently by critical race theorists who are in the middle, of course, being completely denied any funding by many people in the right wing of the country. Many red states have been banning them for months at this point, and they're not particularly happy about it. And as much as I want to say that these arguments have no chance of winning the day at all, and that the left has no ability to push back on this particular argument that the right has made very effectively up to this point, I'd be lying if I said I did. No, these arguments do have a particular chance of making a dent in what the right has done over the past year and change with cancel culture, or the term cancel culture as it might be. And this is due to a mistake on the right's part, mostly. And that is the vagueness of cancel culture. Now, of course, I'm not going to be completely criticizing the term, and not even going to be saying that cancel culture is an inherently flawed term in its vagueness, because, frankly, it doesn't have to be vague. In fact, it is a fairly specific term with specific roots in leftist tactics that have been going on for centuries, primarily the struggle session, which happened very commonly in the USSR, China, and even in the US, with many a Hollywood mogul being canceled in a very similar way back in the 40s. But the malady of this particular issue comes from the first word in the two-word term of cancel culture, that being cancel. Because cancel is kind of a broad term. It can apply to a lot of things. If a TV show gets canceled, is that a part of cancel culture? Well, if you're going to take the left standard for it, yes, because literally anything the right does, or frankly anything that gets canceled in the broad sense, must be a part of cancel culture, according to them, to the point where mundane boycotts of political organizations by other political organizations, or people who are being boycotted for doxing people, or saying that people should be fired for actively advocating for that exact thing, is now considered cancel culture. Or we even get to the point, most recently, where a guy going onto a Zoom meeting with other coworkers and doing very inappropriate things is now considered cancel culture by some people on the left. But, of course, this is all absurd, and most people with eyes will be able to quickly discern that these things have nothing to do with cancel culture. But, in that same breath, most people are mostly unable to define why those things would be separate, and the reason they would be separate can, in fact, be defined, and I'm going to be doing that here, mostly breaking it up into three major points, all of which have their origin in the struggle session. And I won't be covering fully the history of the struggle session and its connections to cancel culture currently here. Rather, that is best left to a video by Razorfist, who would make this video superfluous if I was to cover that particular topic. But in that video, he left me an opening by not specifically defining what made cancel culture. And so that is what I will do here, starting with the first consequence of cancel culture and the first major factor that makes cancel culture, and that is the fact that most cancellations have nothing to do with what you're being canceled from. The content of why you're being canceled, in most cases, has nothing to do with your job. It has nothing to do with what you're doing or what you're being canceled from. No, instead, most cancellations have to do with other vague things that you did in your private life. Take, for instance, one of the most clear examples, Chris Pratt, who hasn't been canceled in full. Of course, he still gets work in Hollywood, but there have been myriad attempts at canceling him, and one of the major ones that happened recently was when he refused to fundraise for Biden. And because he refused to fundraise for Biden, unlike many of the other Avengers, many people on Twitter attempted to cancel him, saying that he's the worst Chris because he isn't actively supporting my political candidate, and other such things. And this doesn't only apply in this case, it also applies in other cases. Take, for instance, the case of The Bachelor, where there was a bit of a saga about a particular cancellation which had to do with an antebellum party. A fairly innocuous party, sort of party, frankly, considering that it's just 1830s period party, no different than, say, a World War II recreation or any other such thing. It's just a way of representing the period at the time. Nothing nefarious, nothing racist, but because a bachelor candidate went to one of these parties, she was canceled. Of course, this had nothing to do with her job on The Bachelor as a contestant. It had nothing to do with that, but she got canceled regardless. And that particular case leads us into our second factor, and that is, if you defend the person being canceled, you will be canceled yourself. The core thing here, it lies within the struggle session itself. You see, one of the common tactics of a struggle session back in the old days was that if anyone even attempted to defend at all the person who was in the middle of the struggle session, that they would be subjected to the same treatment themselves. They would be yelled down just as everyone, the person in the center of the whole controversy was. And this is very clearly represented in that same Bachelor case, where the host of The Bachelor lost his job because he mildly defended the contestant going to this place. Not even saying that she didn't do anything wrong, which someone like I would say, but rather just saying that we should be graceful and compassionate. And this lost him his job, making it so that ABC left him and fired him and parted ways with him. And those are the two major factors, but there is a third one which I feel is quite relevant in many cases. And that is, cancellations are commonly very permanent. There is very rarely any way to completely rid yourself of a cancellation. For the most part, if you're canceled, you're never uncanceled. If you do get uncanceled, it probably wasn't a cancellation in the first place. I mean, you could take, for example, James Gunn, who might be considered one of the prime examples of the right canceling someone, but the fact of the matter is, what actually ended up happening to James Gunn was that, one, he got fired from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, only to return a year later. No one surrounding him and defending him, of which there were many, got canceled themselves or lost their jobs. None of that happened. And even at the point of, it doesn't have a lot to do with his job, isn't even really accurate, because it was on his public Twitter feed, but I guess I'm splitting hairs there. It didn't have a lot to do with his job. I'm not even going to go that far. But the permanence angle is important, because most of the time, a cancellation is permanent. But there is a particular situation in which it isn't necessarily. And that is if you swear ideological fealty sufficiently to the people who are canceling you. If you do that, then you may be able to come back. Take Louis C.K. for example. One of the common examples of cancel culture. He ended up coming back to comedy fairly quickly after being canceled himself, mostly because he is at least partially ideologically in line with the left, with the commies. Meaning that he can get his job back, he can keep working with the institutions, and all that sort of stuff. And that's important, because the major thing about cancel culture that many people forget is that cancel culture is all about ideological fealty. It's an ideological purity test at heart. And the fact of the matter is that most of the cases of right-wing cancel culture aren't that at all. Most of the time, whether you take the CNN list I have as a link down in the description, most of those cases where they were saying Trump was involved in cancel culture weren't him complaining about people lying about him, or complaining about people trying to dox him, or complaining about people being bad at their jobs. All of them had to do with their jobs. All of them had to do with him not being happy with how they were doing their jobs, or just them straight up being objectively terrible at their jobs. That's what ended up happening. And these things are very different. And to completely rein it down, get it to the bare truth of it. There is a large difference between someone who loses their job because they refuse to swear absolute fealty to Stalin on a daily basis and kneel at the altar of communism, and someone who people do not want to give their money to because they refuse to stop doing that thing for 5 adjacent milliseconds. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. If you enjoyed that video, do in fact subscribe down below and check out all the links, very, very pretty links down in the description where you can see this video in other places, whether it be BitChute, Rumble, Brighteon, Odyssey, all of those sorts of places are down in the description. On top of that, share this video if you really, really enjoyed it. And a good place to share this video would be on Minds, Parler, and Gab, where I have accounts there as well, and where I'll occasionally share my thoughts outside of these videos. On top of that, I have breakingonthedaily.locals.com if you want to check out more of this sort of content, if you want to see some extra videos that I do on occasion. That's a good place to go. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. I'm KelKidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.